Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are all doing really well. So if you saw my December video diary, sort of the year-end wrap-up, you'll know that I read 72 books in 2023. So I missed my Goodreads goal, which is totally fine. It was it was just a guideline, and whatever. I didn't read the 75 books. I got to 72. I was 3 short, so I'm good with that. And like I said, it was kind of a rough year, both in my personal life and in my reading journey as well. I had a lot of DNFs. I had a lot of false starts. But I did read a lot of fantastic books. And when I thought back to, the books that I had read that I really loved, I had to do a list and narrow it down. So all in all, when I look back at it, I did have a pretty good reading year, in that there are 10 books that really stick out in my head as the best reads that I had of the entire year. So we're going to go through those books now, and they're not going to be in any particular order except for the last one, because the last one is, and I'm sure you guys probably already know what it is if you're regular viewers of my channel. It's not only my best book of the year, but it is the best book I've read of all time. So these are books that weren't specifically released in 2023. These are my personal best reads of this year. So we're going to get into that, and let me know if you guys agree or disagree down in the comments below. So one of the very first books that I read in 2023 was The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. And this book, I believe it was the second book that I read, and I read it on audio, and I completely gobbled this one up. This is one of the classics that I really wanted to get to this year, and I finally put it on. I finally downloaded it on my Audible, and I put it on, and it didn't disappoint. This book is so good, and I read a lot of books actually this year that had sort of those witchy themes. And this is what I would call one that is sort of gothic adjacent. It has atmosphere, it has romance, but the central part to the story is, Puritan United States, and this young girl ends up getting accused of witchcraft. And it's fantastic. It's sad in places, it's happy in places, but overall it's really well written. And I know Zach from Monster Blood also read this one, I believe either this year or last year, and he was the one that actually, when he talked about it in his video, inspired me to finally pick it up. And it had been on my list for such a long time. And if you haven't read this one and you really like that atmospheric sort of writing, a little bit of romance but not too much, it's not really the central part of the story, and the history of witchcraft and Puritan United States during the witch trials, this is definitely one that you should read. And this, I believe it's the Newbery Award that this one won, and it is 100% deserving of it. And next up on the list is Maggies Grave by David Sodergren. And you're going to see a little bit of a theme here, I think, with some of these books, because this one is also another witchy book, but this one is a modern take. Now, there is actually a grave over, I think this is in Scotland, and it is an actual place like Maggie's Grave, but the story itself is fictional. And this book is not something that I would typically read, in that there is like a lot of body horror, but it's done so well, and you can skim over those places that get really dark. But this is a vengeful witch story. You've got a bunch of teenagers that are just doing things that they're not supposed to be doing, and you have a vengeful witch, and she just wreaks havoc on this group of teenagers. But even more than that, again, here is fantastic writing, and the twist at the end is what really got me. So this book, it was another one I had a lot of difficulty putting down. It was so good, and it's funny because I said when I read this, I wish this was a movie, but it's a movie I would probably never ever watch because of the extreme violence and body horror and everything. But this is one I think probably on this list that I think needs to get more love, More people need to read this book. It's fantastic horror. It's so well written. The body horror is done really, really well. You've got a great twist in there. There's a lot of action, and then you've got the loop in with this, you know, folklore from Scotland, and it kind of does flashback to like Maggie's actual life, and it's one of those situations where you're actually cheering on the villain a little bit because of what had happened to her in her own life. And it was just overall, it was really, really, really good. When I think about back to a lot of the books that I read this year, this is one that definitely sticks out to me in my brain, and I'm going to be thinking about it for a long, long time. And then next up is One Girl in All the World by Kendara Blake. Now this is a sequel to her first book, In Every Generation, which is a Buffy spin-off. And In Every Generation was on my favorites list last year, and when I spoke about that one, which was the first in this, I believe it's a trilogy that's coming out, I did say that it was more so than any other fan fiction or comics or anything else, this really does feel like Buffy season 8, and this book is Buffy season 9. So she really captures Sunnydale. It feels right, the characters feel right, she got the voice of a lot of them. It really does feel like something that, you know, Joss Whedon would have written back in the day. So she is obviously a mega Buffy fan, and she's a fantastic writer, and these stories that I've read from her, they really knock it out of the park, and I can't wait for the next one to come out. So there is the third book in what I would perceive as a trilogy coming out in 2024, so just in a couple of months. So keep an eye out for my most anticipated books of 2024, because that one is in there. And if you haven't read this yet because you're kind of afraid to pick it up because you're a super mega Buffy fan like me, she really does a fantastic job. She doesn't ruin the story at all. I've read a couple of Buffy spin-offs that just, they didn't deliver, and she does a fantastic job. So please, if you're a Buffy fan, go read these. And the next one is actually a novella, and a lot of people read this, I believe, kind of, you know, around 2022 or early 2023, and that's Man F This House. And this book, you know, it's kind of unbelievable that it's on my favorites list this year, because there's, you know, it's such a short novella. It's from someone who, you know, isn't what you would consider mainstream. But when I think back about the books that really stuck in my head for whatever reason, this is one of them. So this is a kind of a new take on a haunted house story, and it really is a new take. I haven't read anything like this before, and what I loved about it was a great story. It had a great haunting premise, and then you have the wife who you're not really sure if she's seeing things around the house or if she's having, you know, like some sort of mental break, and then there's strife in the family. So it has all of the elements of a haunted house, but then it becomes a complete fever dream. I was reading excerpts of this out to my husband and dying laughing because it was just so ridiculous, but so good. So if I were to explain to you kind of what's going on in this story, which is a major spoiler, so I won't, you'd be like, what? Like, that kind of sounds weird, or it sounds dumb, or, you know, what the heck kind of thing. But the whole story altogether is just so good. And when I finished it, I was like, yeah, that was a good read. It made me laugh. It made me smile. It made me go, what the heck is going on in this story? It had all of the haunting elements. You've got creepy kids in here. So there's two kids. There's a son and a daughter, and the son is like super, super smart. And he kind of sees the world really differently. So this book, like I said, it's kind of unbelievable to me that it made it on my favorites of the year, but it's so out there that it's good. And if you haven't read this one and you enjoy haunted house stories, I recommend giving it a go. I know a lot of people didn't like it because of the twist element and the new way that they took this, the new direction that they went in, but it was really, really good. So I would highly suggest giving this one a go. And then back in May, I did my month of religious horror, my unintentional month of religious horror. And if you haven't seen that video, it's actually one of my favorite videos that I've ever made. And it was one of my favorite reading months that I've ever had. Just about everything that I read was super. We watched a lot of religious horror movies, ones that we've seen, you know, 100 times. There were ones that we had never seen before. There were good ones and bad ones. And I had such a fun month. And May was really, really hard for me because I was in between jobs. I was getting ready to start a new one. And I had just wanted something to be really, really stellar. And it turned out to be really, really stellar that month. So I really enjoyed that. And the book that I read that really sticks out in my head from that month is The Exorcist House by Nick Roberts. And you know, all of us have read so many sort of exorcism, religious horror sort of stories that I was almost afraid to pick this one up because I thought it was going to be one of those ones where I was just rolling my eyes because it was the same thing that we've heard over and over and over. And you know, it's been done. You know, and you do want something new, you crave something new. And this one is something new. So here we follow a family that moves into a rural farmhouse from the city, and the man that owned it before them was sort of a lay exorcist. And so the father stumbles upon all of these diaries and videotapes and everything of stuff that had happened in the house before. So you have the house with a history, has a haunting element in there. It has a demonic element in there. There's stuff going on with the wife that's sort of removed from the central story, but it ultimately gets wrapped around in there. They have a teenage daughter and there's stuff going on with her, and the father has a completely different thing going on with him. So there's a lot of elements, but it's one of those stories where the elements are done so well that it fits together just perfectly. It's not a lot, like it sounds like a lot of elements, but the way that Nick Roberts wrote this story, it's something new, it's a new spin, it hooks you in right away, and you're interested in all of the different storylines. There wasn't a single storyline in there that I wasn't interested in, and then he ties everything up in a pretty little bow. It was just like a chef's kiss of a book. And religious horror, of course, is one of my favorite subgenres of horror, and to have this as part of that month where I was struggling so much, it really hit the nail on the head for me. It made me super, super happy. And this was another one that I had to tell Matt exactly what was going on in this story, because I was like, I want this to be made into a movie. This is another one that I wish they would make it into a movie because it would be a slam bang one. So if you like religious horror, please, please pick up The Exorcist House by Nick Roberts. And then, as you guys know, in 2023, I have discovered the world of Hester Fox, who is very quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. I've read, I think, 5 of her books this year, and basically everything that she's put out so far. And there is a new release coming in 2024 that she's putting out as well, and I will be the first in line to pick it up. So I wanted to pick one out of the books that I read by her to put on this list. And when I think back, you know, I loved so many of her stories. Some were better than others, but the one that really, really sticks out to me is The Erir of Blackwood Library. And because it was a perfect balance of, you know, Gothic fiction and with the romance as sort of a subplot line. I can't say I don't like it, but I don't prefer a lot of Gothic fiction where there's like a lot of emphasis on the romance and everything else is a subplot line. But this one was perfect. So it was about this young lady who finds out that she is the heir of this manor house, and so she has to sign for it, and one of the stipulations of her accepting this is that she actually has to move to that manor house. And there's a staff there that's very secretive, and you know, the housekeeper doesn't really like her and they don't really get along, so it has a lot of those Rebecca kind of feels. And she discovers that this manor has this humongous library, but there's something very odd about the books, some of the books in the library that she kind of discovers. And then there's a lot of occult that's wound in here, secret society wound in here, the romance element. This book had me hooked. Like, out of the 5 books that I read by her, which most of them are 5 stars, I would say between 4 and 5 stars, this one was the perfect balance, and I recommend this book to everybody. I think Hester Fox is vastly underappreciated, especially for people who love Gothic fiction. And, you know, a book about books where it has like this secret library, and just the way that she describes things and the atmosphere and all of this, and the occult elements wound into it, and then, you know, this man that she's supposed to be in love with, and, you know, is he bad, is he good, she can't really figure it out. And you know, it just has every element completely perfectly. And this was another book where once I got about 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through, I was like, how is she going to bring all of this together? But she really did. And it was another one that when I finished it, I was like, yeah, this is fantastic. It was really, really well written. The atmosphere is there. I love her writing. And I would highly recommend, if you are going to pick up Hester Fox and you like reading audiobooks, the narrator that they use for her books is fantastic. One of the narrators has done a lot of her books, and I believe this is, so there's like a US narrator and there's a British narrator that do her books, and they're both really, really fantastic. So if you're looking for somewhere to start with Hester Fox, this one was definitely my favorite. So next up on the list, we actually do have a new release. So this is The Only One Left by Riley Sager, and Riley Sager is very much a hit or miss sort of author for me, and I finally did decide to pick up this book because of my friend Nakia from Nakia's Hideaway. She really reads a lot of thrillers, and she loved this one. And it has almost like a Lizzie Borden sort of element into it, where this old lady, when she was younger, she was accused of murder, and now she's basically like a recluse that's living in this huge house, this huge mansion. And a nurse comes in to help her, and she starts unraveling the past. So she's a recluse because, like, basically society has shunned her. So the nurse starts to learn about all of these stories, and then on top of that, the nurse has, you know, her own dialogue herself about her past. So we kind of bounce back and forth between these timelines. And this was one of the first ones that I read with my coworker that I carpool with back and forth to work, and we both, you know, were having all of these conversations about how we thought this was going to go. And in true Riley Sager fashion, there's not just one twist in here, there's several. And although I kind of had some of them figured out as we were going along, I definitely didn't have all of them. So, you know, like I said, hit or miss author, but this one was slam bang. I saw this book on a couple of people's worst of the year. So, you know, it's not for everybody, but as far as thrillers go, it really did hook me in, and it had a lot of Gothic elements to it as well. So I think that was something else that kind of bumped it up the list for me also. So like I said, I don't read a whole lot of like new releases as soon as they come out, but this was one of them, and it really did it for me. So Riley Sager was kind of falling to the backside for me, but you know, he definitely redeemed himself, and I can't wait to see what he comes up with next. And next up on the list is one of my most anticipated books from the last couple of years, and this really did live up to what I thought it was going to be, and it was definitely worth the wait, and that is Autumn Crow High Fresh Hell by Cameron Chaney. So you know, it was a couple of years in the making for this one to come out, and you guys know how much I love the Autumn Crow stories. I read a selection of them every Halloween, and this one is Cameron's first foray into writing full-length novels, so that this is going to be his first in sort of a vintage inspired series, so very much like Fear Street, Goosebumps, that sort of thing. And he really builds out the world of Autumn Crow here. So I did do a full review of this book on the channel, and so you can look back in my catalog and find that. But what I love about this book Number one is because it really does capture Autumn Crow. Number two is he takes an idea that he had of short stories and he develops it in a way that it's like, okay, this is a lot more dark and sinister than I thought it was, because Autumn Crow, the short story collection, is a lot more cozy, even though it has terrifying elements and it can get quite brutal in places. This is on a whole different level, and it really does capture that Fear Street vintage 80s 90s sort of atmosphere. But what puts this on my favorite books of the year list is Cameron's ability to write emotion. So when you're talking about love, hatred, grief, sadness, I hated him in certain parts of this book because, you know, I was grieving situations that were happening in here. And that's why, you know, even more so than the vintage and it's Autumn Crow and it's Cameron and all of that, that's not what put it on this list. It's his writing ability and his ability to really capture that emotion. So if you by chance haven't picked this one up yet and you haven't read the original Autumn Crow stories, I'm going to continue to hype this book and this series and the original book as much as possible. I have no idea when the next one is coming out. I would really like to know, but I know Cameron really poured his heart and soul into this one. So no matter how long it takes for the next book to come out in this series, I will wait because I want him to really, really perfect it. And even though, like, I didn't give this book a full 5 stars, I didn't. It really does stick out to me in my mind, his writing ability and, you know, where he's going to go with all of this, because it just kept building and building and building and building. So I had to put it on here. I have such a love for this fictional place and what happens there. And I think every spooky goth alternative nerd who loves horror and Halloween wants to live in Autumn Crow. But having said that, it's getting sinister, and I love that aspect because I'm like, I didn't know Cameron would go to the places that he went, and there were a couple of things in here that were quite brutal, and I love that, and I love his writing, and he's such a fantastic person. So put Autumn Crow on this list. I had to. The emotion in this book is spot on. If you haven't picked it up yet, please go pick this one up. And then next up on this list is The Storyteller by Dave Grohl. And this is a book that I have had sitting on my Audible subscription for such a long time. And I wanted to read something outside of just regular fiction. I had been really struggling with a huge reading slump in November and December of this year, or last year, I guess, at this point. And this one just, it really rejuvenated me. And I love Dave Grohl so much, and Nirvana will always be my absolute favorite band. The Foo Fighters are great too, but, you know, Dave Grohl as a person himself, from what I've seen in interviews, and, you know, he's just a really, seems like a really awesome person and very, very talented. And this book really fit in with what you think Dave Grohl is like as a human being. It's written fantastically, and I love that he narrates it himself. So this is another one where I laughed, I cried, I was upset. I love how he talked about his mom, and I love how he talked about everything that had happened in his past. It was such an adventure. And then, of course, talking about Nirvana, how they came about and the difficulties, and, you know, it came in like a blaze of glory and it went out like a blaze of glory, and talking about Kurt's death and all of that sort of thing. So it really did live up to expectation. I think one of the reasons why I didn't pick it up earlier was because I was afraid it wasn't going to live up to what I wanted it to be, even though it had gotten stellar reviews. And if you haven't read this one and you're a Dave Grohl fan, a rock and roll fan, a Nirvana fan, this book, it was so good. I listened to this a lot when I was walking, either on my treadmill or outside, and, you know, I was just smiling walking along the road. I was crying walking along the road at one point. And so this is just right up there. If he ever writes anything else, I'm definitely going to read it. And here we are at the final book. So my top read of 2023 actually ended up being my top read of all time, and that of course is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. And I read this also as part of my month of unintentional religious horror in May, and like I said, I'd been having such a rough go of things, and this book is just on such a different level. Like, I had seen, obviously, like any horror fan, I'd seen The Exorcist 100 times, the movie. And while the movie is good, the book really concentrates on crisis of faith, on what the priest was going through and those interactions that were happening, and a little bit less on what was going on with Regan. Like, that was still a huge part of this. Obviously, they were doing an exorcism on her, but it really is a book about crisis of faith. And I loved every single page. I gobbled up every single page. And I buddy read this with my friend Zach from Shady Side Library, and I think he really enjoyed it as well. I think he described this book as total insanity, and I mean, he's not wrong. He's absolutely right. It is complete insanity, but it's complete insanity to a level that I absolutely love. It's a brilliant story. It's brilliantly written. There's so much emotion in here, and there's so much going on, and especially, like, this came out in the 70s. You know, it was during a time when the church wasn't as popular in society. They were losing hold on a lot of people, and so just even in the, like, looking at the time period that this had come out in, there's references in here, of course, to the Manson murders, and I thought that was an interesting twist to wrap in here, even with just what was going on in, like, between 69 and onward, the Summer of Love. And I just, like I said, I gobbled up every single page. I loved this book so much, and I still haven't rewatched the movie. I said I was going to rewatch the movie after reading this. Still haven't done it, but I'm going to continue to read this book over and over. This is my vintage copy. It's not in good shape, and I'm actually really glad this is not in good shape, because I'm going to probably use this one as my reading copy, and I'm going to read it over and over. I also read part of this on audiobook, and the audiobook is so good, especially for the actual exorcism scenes. They're terrifying. So if you haven't actually read The Exorcist, which I know I'm late getting to this one, it's slam bang. It's so good. And funny enough, I ended up reading Legion, which is the second book by William Peter Blatty that follows the detective from this book. And I hated it. I DNF'd it. I was doing it as a buddy read with two of my friends, E.D. Lewis and Jackie from the Jersey Ghouls podcast, and they ended up finishing it, but neither one of them liked it, and I ended up DNFing it, even though I was the one that organized the buddy read, which I felt kind of dumb doing that, but it was pissing me off to no end. But the first book, this, I think, is probably going to go down as my favorite read of all time. Probably ever. I don't know if I'll ever find another comparison to this one. It's going to be a very, very long time. So yeah, favorite book of all time, favorite book of 2023. If you haven't picked up The Exorcist, please finally do. I know a lot of us out there have only ever seen the movie, haven't actually picked up the book. So please go do it, because you're not going to be disappointed. So there you guys go. Those are my top reads, top 10 reads of 2023. You know, my reading year wasn't stellar, but the 10 books that I picked out for this list were on a completely different level. Every single one of them made me happy. They made me sad. They made me cry. They made me laugh. And I hope if you haven't given some of these a try that you will now. So if you enjoyed the video, please make sure to give me a thumbs up. Leave me a question or a comment down below, because you know I love chatting with you guys. But until next time, stay spooky, everybody. Bye.